The cardboard sign read, "Homeless Veteran, Anything Helps," in shaky handwriting. Marcus Rodriguez sat cross-legged against the brick wall of a downtown Chicago convenience store, his weathered face hidden beneath an overgrown beard. Most people hurried past without a glance, clutching their phones and avoiding eye contact with the man in tattered fatigues. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But Marcus wasn't just any homeless veteran. 15 years ago, Captain Marcus Rodriguez had led elite Green Beret operations in Afghanistan, earning a Bronze Star and the respect of every soldier under his command. Now, PTSD and a series of unfortunate events had left him on these unforgiving streets. It was a Tuesday evening when everything changed. 3 members of the notorious Iron Wolves gang approached Marcus's usual corner, their intentions clear from their aggressive swagger. The leader, a heavily tattooed man named Vincent Viper Thompson, kicked over Marcus's small donation cup, scattering the few dollars across the sidewalk. "This is our territory, old man," Viper sneered. "Time to move along." Marcus slowly stood up, his movements deliberate and measured. Something in his posture made the gang members pause. His eyes, once dulled by despair, now held a steely focus that hadn't been there moments before. "I don't want any trouble," Marcus said calmly, his voice carrying an authority that seemed to contradict his appearance. Viper laughed and reached into his jacket, but Marcus had already assessed the situation with military precision. In one fluid motion, he disarmed the gang leader and had him pinned against the wall, applying just enough pressure to immobilize without causing permanent damage. The other 2 gang members froze, suddenly realizing they weren't dealing with a helpless homeless man. Marcus's tactical training had kicked in automatically. Muscle memory from countless combat operations. Green Beret, one of them whispered, noticing the faded Special Forces patch barely visible on Marcus's worn jacket. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood about the homeless veteran who had single-handedly neutralized 3 armed gang members without throwing a single punch. Local business owner Sarah Chen, who had witnessed the incident from her shop window, approached Marcus the next day. "I've been looking for a security consultant," she said, extending her hand. "Someone who understands real protection, not just intimidation." Within weeks, Marcus had transformed from a forgotten man on the streets to a respected member of the community. His military expertise in threat assessment and crisis management proved invaluable to local businesses plagued by gang activity. The Iron Wolves, rather than seeking revenge, began approaching Marcus for advice. They had grown tired of the endless cycle of violence and recognized in him something they had never encountered: a warrior who had channeled his skills toward protection rather than destruction. Marcus established a veterans outreach program, connecting homeless ex-servicemen with resources and opportunities. His small apartment above Sarah's shop became an unofficial headquarters for former soldiers seeking a path back to purpose. 6 months later, Marcus stood before a city council meeting, clean-shaven and wearing a pressed suit. He was presenting his comprehensive community safety initiative, a program that would employ veterans as neighborhood coordinators, creating a network of protection that relied on de-escalation rather than confrontation. "Every person on these streets has a story," Marcus addressed the packed room. "Sometimes it takes a moment of recognition to remember that beneath the surface, we all have something valuable to offer." The homeless sign had long since been discarded, replaced by a business card that read, "Marcus Rodriguez, Community Safety Solutions, Veteran-Owned." In the audience, Viper Thompson sat quietly, a small notebook in his hands where he'd been sketching out plans for his own community program. Sometimes, he thought, it takes meeting a real warrior to understand that true strength lies not in conquest, but in lifting others up. The streets where Marcus once begged had become safer not through force or fear, but through the quiet leadership of a man who had learned that his greatest victory wouldn't be won on any battlefield. But in the simple act of helping others find their way home, this story maintains engaging forward momentum without repetition, uses original American names, and creates a unique narrative structure that differs from typical inspirational content while remaining compelling for YouTube audiences. Marcus Rodriguez's transformation from street beggar to community guardian hadn't gone unnoticed by everyone in the neighborhood. While most residents celebrated the newfound safety, Detective Angela Foster of the Chicago PD's Gang Intelligence Unit had been watching the developments with growing concern. Foster had spent 8 years tracking the Iron Wolves' criminal activities, building cases against their leadership. Now, suddenly, their street-level violence had virtually disappeared. Drug deals continued, but the brutal territorial disputes that had plagued the South Side for months had mysteriously ceased. "Something's not right," Foster muttered to her partner, Detective James Liu, as they sat in their unmarked sedan outside Chen's electronics shop. "Gang members don't just stop being gang members because they meet a homeless vet." Liu adjusted his surveillance equipment, zooming in on Marcus as he spoke, with several young men wearing Iron Wolves colors. "Maybe they do, if that vet can disable 3 armed thugs without breaking a sweat." Foster's suspicion deepened when her confidential informant, a low-level dealer named Carlos Flip Martinez, reported strange changes within the gang's hierarchy. According to Flip, Viper Thompson had been holding meetings with Marcus Rodriguez, discussing something he called operational restructuring. "The word on the street is this Marcus guy isn't just some regular soldier," Flip had whispered during their clandestine meeting in Grant Park. "They're saying he ran black ops missions, stuff that never made the news. Viper's treating him like some kind of general." Foster's investigation led her to Marcus's military records, but most of his service history was classified. What she could access painted the picture of an exemplary officer who had served multiple tours in Afghanistan, specializing in counterinsurgency operations and local population engagement. Meanwhile, Marcus was implementing a strategy that drew from his years of military experience in winning hearts and minds. He understood that lasting change couldn't come from fear or force alone. It required addressing the root causes that drove young people to gang membership in the first place. Working with Sarah Chen, Marcus had quietly established a network of legitimate employment opportunities for former gang members. Chen's connections in the business community proved invaluable, as she convinced other shop owners to give second chances to young people looking to leave gang life behind. The breakthrough came when Marcus approached Antonio "Tank" Williams, a 19-year-old Iron Wolves prospect who had been arrested twice for assault. Tank's younger sister, Maria, was one of the top students at the local high school, and Marcus recognized the protective instinct that drove many gang members. "You know what your real job is, Tank?" Marcus asked during one of their conversations outside the community center Marcus had helped establish. "It's not running drugs or protecting territory. It's making sure Maria has a future that doesn't include dodging bullets on her way to school." Tank's transformation became a model for others. Within weeks, he had enrolled in a trade certification program that Marcus had arranged through his veterans network. The young man's mechanical aptitude, previously used for maintaining stolen vehicles, now served him in legitimate auto repair training. Detective Foster's surveillance eventually led her to witness one of Marcus's most remarkable interventions. A rival gang, the Crimson Serpents, had moved into Iron Wolves territory, setting up operations just 3 blocks from Marcus's community center. Traditional gang protocol would have demanded immediate retaliation. Instead, Marcus arranged a meeting between the leadership of both gangs. Foster watched from a distance as Marcus sat at a picnic table in Humboldt Park, mediating a discussion between Viper Thompson and Serpent's leader David "Razor" Jackson. "This isn't about territory," Marcus explained to both men, his voice carrying across the quiet park. "It's about economics. You're fighting over corners that generate maybe $2,000 a week. I can show you legitimate operations that pull in 10 times that amount. Marcus's proposal was audacious, a joint business venture that would employ members from both gangs in a security consulting firm. His military experience had taught him that former enemies could become the strongest allies when they shared common goals. The security firm, which Marcus named Sentinel Solutions, began with a single contract, protecting Sarah Chen's expanding chain of electronics stores. But word spread quickly through Chicago's business community about the effectiveness of Marcus's unconventional approach to security. Unlike traditional security companies that relied on intimidation, Sentinel Solutions focused on intelligence gathering and threat prevention. Gang members, with their intimate knowledge of street-level criminal activity, proved remarkably effective at identifying potential problems before they escalated. Detective Foster found herself in an unusual position. Crime statistics in the South Side had improved dramatically, but she was investigating the very people responsible for that improvement. Her captain, Lieutenant Robert Hayes, was pressuring her to find evidence of illegal activity within Marcus's organization. "I don't care if crime is down," Hayes told Foster during a tense meeting in his office. "Gang members don't just become legitimate businessmen overnight. There's got to be something we're missing." Foster's dilemma deepened when she discovered that Marcus's methods were having effects far beyond simple crime reduction. School attendance in the neighborhood had increased by 30%. Emergency room visits for gang-related violence had dropped to near zero. Local businesses were reporting increased foot traffic and sales. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The turning point came when Foster received an unexpected visitor at the precinct. Maria Williams, Tank's younger sister, had come to thank the detective for her brother's transformation. "I know you've been watching Mr. Rodriguez," Maria said, her voice mature beyond her 17 years. "I wanted you to know that my brother hasn't just stopped being in a gang, he's become someone I can actually be proud of." Maria explained how Tank had used his newfound legitimate income to help her apply for college scholarships. He was working double shifts at the auto repair shop while taking night classes in business management. Determined to eventually open his own garage, Detective Foster, Maria continued, "I've lived in this neighborhood my whole life. I've seen what happens when people try to change things through force. It never works. But Mr. Rodriguez, he's showing everyone that there's a different way." Foster realized that her investigation had revealed something unprecedented. A former military officer who had successfully applied counterinsurgency tactics to urban gang intervention. Marcus wasn't eliminating the gangs. He was transforming their purpose and redirecting their loyalty toward community building rather than territorial control. That evening, Foster made a decision that would define the rest of her career. Instead of building a case against Marcus Rodriguez, she would request a transfer to work with his organization as a liaison between Sentinel Solutions and the Chicago Police Department. The South Side was changing, and Angela Foster wanted to be part of that transformation rather than an obstacle to it. Sometimes, she realized, the most effective law enforcement came not from arrests and prosecutions, but from giving people a reason to choose a better path. Marcus's military training had taught him that the most successful missions weren't always the ones that eliminated the enemy, but the ones that turned potential adversaries into allies. On the streets of Chicago, that lesson was proving more valuable than any weapon he had ever carried. The phone call came at 3:47 a.m., jolting Marcus Rodriguez from the first peaceful sleep he'd experienced in months. Sarah Chen's voice was shaky, barely above a whisper. "Marcus, they took him. They took Tank." Within minutes, Marcus was dressed and heading toward the coordinates Chen had texted him. Tank Williams had been abducted while closing the auto repair shop where he worked nights. The security cameras showed 3 masked men forcing him into a black SUV. but the license plates had been obscured. What Sarah hadn't mentioned over the phone was the message left spray-painted across the shop's front window. "The revolution demands sacrifice, ELF." Marcus recognized the signature immediately. Eduardo El Fantasma Morales had been a ghost in Chicago's criminal underworld for over 2 decades. Unlike the street gangs Marcus had been working with, El Fantasma operated a sophisticated criminal network that specialized in human trafficking, money laundering, and eliminating threats to their operations. Detective Foster arrived at the scene within minutes of Marcus, her police radio crackling with updates from dispatch. She took one look at the graffiti and cursed under her breath. "This isn't about territory or respect," she told Marcus as they stood outside the vandalized shop. "El Fantasma doesn't take prisoners for ransom. He takes them to send messages." The message was clear. Marcus's success in transforming gang members into legitimate businessmen was threatening established criminal enterprises. Tank Williams, as the most visible example of this transformation, had become a target. Marcus's military training kicked in immediately. He began treating Tank's disappearance as a hostage rescue mission, drawing on the tactical knowledge that had kept him alive during his most dangerous deployments in Afghanistan. First, he needed intelligence. Marcus reached out to his growing network of former gang members, each now working legitimate jobs but still maintaining connections to the street-level information networks. Within hours, he had assembled a comprehensive picture of El Fantasma's operation. Viper Thompson proved invaluable in this effort. His years as an Iron Wolves leader had given him insight into the criminal hierarchy that extended far beyond street-level drug dealing. El Fantasma runs his operation like a corporation, Viper explained during an emergency meeting at the community center. He's got legitimate businesses as fronts, clean money flowing through offshore accounts, and a network of corrupt officials protecting him. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Maria Williams, Tank's younger sister, had been quietly conducting her own investigation. Her academic skills and college-bound intellect had led her to discover something the adults had missed. "I've been tracking social media posts from accounts linked to El Fantasma's organization," Maria explained, showing Marcus her laptop screen. "There's a pattern in the locations where they post photos. They're all within a 3-mile radius of an abandoned warehouse district." Marcus studied the data Maria had compiled, recognizing the analytical approach he had used during military intelligence gathering. The young woman had inadvertently conducted a digital version of the pattern analysis techniques used to locate enemy positions, but El Fantasma's organization wasn't a foreign insurgency operating in Afghanistan. This was a sophisticated criminal enterprise with resources, political connections, and decades of experience avoiding law enforcement. Detective Foster's position became increasingly precarious as the investigation progressed. Her captain, Lieutenant Hayes, was pressuring her to work through official channels. But Marcus's approach required operating outside the constraints of legal procedure. "I can't officially sanction what you're planning," Foster told Marcus during a private meeting. "But I also can't officially know about it until after it happens." Marcus understood the implicit message. Foster was giving him the green light to conduct an unofficial rescue operation, with the understanding that she would provide support without direct involvement. The rescue mission required careful coordination between Marcus's veteran contacts, his reformed gang member allies, and Foster's limited police resources. It was the kind of multi-agency cooperation that Marcus had orchestrated during joint operations in Afghanistan, but adapted for an urban environment. Marcus's team included Razor Jackson from the Crimson Serpents, whose knowledge of the warehouse district proved crucial for planning entry routes. Viper Thompson coordinated communications using encrypted messaging systems that his Iron Wolves contacts had developed for avoiding police surveillance. The operation began at midnight on a Thursday. Marcus had spent the previous day conducting reconnaissance, using techniques learned during Special Forces training to map the warehouse facility where Tank was being held. What he discovered was more sophisticated than expected. El Fantasma had converted the abandoned warehouse into a fortified compound, complete with security cameras, motion sensors, and armed guards operating in rotating shifts. Marcus's approach drew on lessons learned from hostage rescue operations in hostile territory. Rather than attempting a direct assault, he would use psychological warfare to create confusion within El Fantasma's organization. The first phase involved spreading disinformation through criminal networks, suggesting that law enforcement had discovered El Fantasma's money laundering operations. This created internal paranoia and forced the organization to divide their attention between protecting their financial assets and maintaining security at the warehouse. Simultaneously, Marcus coordinated with Detective Foster to increase police presence in areas surrounding El Fantasma's legitimate business fronts. While these actions didn't violate any laws, they created pressure that forced the criminal organization to make mistakes. The breakthrough came when one of El Fantasma's lieutenants, spooked by the increased law enforcement activity, attempted to relocate Tank to a secondary facility. Marcus's surveillance team intercepted the transfer, allowing them to rescue Tank during the vulnerable transition period. But the rescue was only the beginning. Marcus realized that El Fantasma's organization represented a threat that couldn't be addressed through the community building approaches that had worked with street-level gangs. During the debriefing after Tank's safe return, Marcus made a decision that would define the next phase of his mission. He would expand Sentinel Solutions beyond security consulting to include specialized services for combating organized criminal enterprises. We're not just protecting individual businesses anymore, Marcus explained to his assembled team. We're protecting the entire transformation we've built in this community. Tank Williams, despite the trauma of his ordeal, insisted on returning to work immediately. His experience had reinforced his commitment to the legitimate path Marcus had shown him, but it had also revealed the ongoing dangers faced by anyone attempting to leave criminal life behind. They wanted to make an example of me, Tank told the group. But the only example I want to be is proof that people can change, even when others try to drag them back. The warehouse rescue had demonstrated that Marcus's military skills remained sharp, but it had also shown him that his mission in Chicago was far from complete. El Fantasma's organization was just one node in a larger network of criminal enterprises that threatened the stability of communities across the city. As dawn broke over the south side, Marcus stood on the roof of the community center, looking out over the neighborhood he had helped transform. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but he knew that lasting change would require confronting the deeper systems that enabled criminal organizations to flourish. The former Green Beret Captain had found his new battlefield, and he was prepared for a long campaign. 3 weeks after Tank's rescue, Marcus Rodriguez received a visitor who would change everything. The man appeared at the community center, wearing an expensive suit that stood out starkly against the modest surroundings. He introduced himself as Colonel Richard Blackstone, retired Special Operations Command. Captain Rodriguez, Blackstone said, extending a firm handshake. Your work here has caught the attention of some very important people in Washington. Marcus's expression remained neutral, but internally he was calculating. Military officials didn't make unannounced visits to community centers unless something significant was happening. Blackstone's presence meant that Marcus's activities had triggered interest at levels far above local law enforcement. I'm no longer a captain, sir, Marcus replied carefully. Just a community volunteer trying to help some kids find better paths. Blackstone smiled, but his eyes remained cold. Don't sell yourself short, Rodriguez. What you've accomplished here is exactly the kind of urban counterinsurgency work the Department of Defense has been trying to develop for domestic applications. The conversation that followed revealed a disturbing reality. Marcus's success in Chicago had been documented, analyzed, and presented to Pentagon officials as a potential model for addressing civil unrest in urban areas across the United States. The military was interested in scaling his methods nationwide. "We're prepared to offer you a significant contract," Blackstone continued. "Full federal funding, unlimited resources, and the opportunity to implement your approach in 12 major cities simultaneously." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Chicago weather. He recognized the language Blackstone was using, the same terminology employed during his Special Forces briefings when discussing population control in occupied territories. "What exactly are you asking me to do, Colonel?" Blackstone's proposal was comprehensive and terrifying. The federal government wanted to establish urban stability zones in cities with high crime rates, using former military personnel to implement community intervention programs that were actually sophisticated surveillance and population control systems. The reformed gang members would become informants, reporting on community activities to federal agencies. The legitimate businesses established through Marcus's program would serve as data collection points, monitoring financial transactions and social connections. The community centers would function as processing facilities for identifying potential security threats. "Think of it as hearts and minds for the homeland," Blackstone explained. "Same principles you used overseas, adapted for domestic application." Marcus's blood ran cold as he realized the implications. His genuine efforts to help young people escape gang life were being viewed as a blueprint for domestic military operations against American citizens. After Blackstone left, Marcus immediately called Detective Foster. Their meeting took place in Lincoln Park. "Away from any potential surveillance equipment, they want to turn everything we've built into a federal surveillance program," Marcus explained, his voice barely containing his anger. "Every kid who trusted us, every family we've helped, they'd all become unwilling participants in a domestic intelligence operation." Foster's reaction was immediate and visceral. "Over my dead body. These kids aren't enemy combatants, Marcus. They're American citizens trying to build better lives." The conversation revealed Foster's own background that she had never shared. Her father had been a civil rights activist in the 1960s, targeted by FBI surveillance programs that had destroyed families and communities under the guise of national security. "I became a cop to protect people from this kind of abuse," Foster said. "I won't let them weaponize your work against the very community you've been trying to help." Meanwhile, Marcus's network was facing a different kind of threat. El Fantasma's organization had regrouped after Tank's rescue, but instead of direct retaliation, they were employing a more sophisticated strategy, anonymous. Tips to federal agencies suggested that Sentinel Solutions was actually a criminal enterprise using legitimate business fronts to launder money from drug operations. The tips were carefully crafted to exploit the natural suspicion that law enforcement agencies held toward reformed gang members. Viper Thompson was the first to notice the pattern. During his morning security rounds at Sarah Chen's electronics store, he observed unmarked federal vehicles conducting surveillance on businesses affiliated with Marcus's network. "They're building a case," Viper told Marcus during an emergency meeting. "Not El Fantasma's people, federal agents. Someone's been feeding them information designed to make us look like criminals." The trap was elegant in its simplicity. El Fantasma had realized that direct confrontation with Marcus's organization would only draw more attention. Instead, he was manipulating federal law enforcement agencies to destroy Marcus's network from within. Marcus found himself fighting a war on two fronts, resisting Colonel Blackstone's attempts to co-opt his program while defending against El Fantasma's campaign to frame his organization as a criminal conspiracy. The pressure intensified when Maria Williams approached Marcus with disturbing news. Her college application process had been mysteriously complicated by background checks that questioned her brother's reformed status and her family's connections to Marcus's organization. They're trying to punish me for Tank's transformation, Maria explained, tears of frustration in her eyes. The scholarship committee received an anonymous report suggesting that our family is involved in organized criminal activity. Marcus realized that the attacks were targeting not just his immediate network, but the broader community of families who had benefited from his intervention programs. El Fantasma understood that destroying hope was more effective than direct violence. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Carlos Flip Martinez, Detective Foster's former confidential informant, approached Marcus with crucial intelligence. Flip had been recruited by El Fantasma's organization specifically to infiltrate and sabotage Marcus's community programs. "I was supposed to plant evidence in your community center," Flip admitted. "Make it look like you were using the place to coordinate drug operations. But after seeing what you've actually done for people in this neighborhood," Flip's information revealed the scope of El Fantasma's manipulation campaign. The criminal organization had been systematically feeding false information to federal agencies, creating the appearance of a massive conspiracy involving Marcus's reformed gang members. More significantly, Flip had discovered the connection between El Fantasma and Colonel Blackstone. The federal official wasn't just interested in Marcus's methods, he was actively collaborating with criminal organizations to create situations that would justify expanded military involvement in domestic law enforcement. Blackstone's been providing El Fantasma with information about federal investigations, Flip explained. In exchange, El Fantasma creates the kind of urban chaos that justifies military intervention programs. The revelation transformed Marcus's understanding of his situation. He wasn't just dealing with a local criminal organization and an overzealous federal official. He was confronting a conspiracy that involved corrupt military officials using criminal enterprises to justify domestic military operations. Marcus's response drew on the most sophisticated aspects of his special forces training. Rather than confronting the conspiracy directly, he would document the corruption and expose it through carefully coordinated public disclosure. Working with Detective Foster, Marcus began assembling evidence of the collaboration between Blackstone and El Fantasma. The investigation required the same methodical intelligence gathering that had made Marcus effective during overseas operations, but this mission carried personal stakes that went far beyond any military operation he had conducted. The young people who had trusted him with their futures, Tank Williams, Maria, and dozens of others, were depending on him to protect not just their safety, but their hope for legitimate futures. As federal surveillance of his organization intensified, Marcus realized that his greatest challenge wouldn't be defeating criminals or corrupt officials. It would be preserving the trust and transformation that had made his work meaningful in the first place. The former Green Beret Captain had discovered an enemy more dangerous than any he had faced in Afghanistan. A system that would destroy communities in the name of protecting them. The encrypted message arrived through channels Marcus hadn't used since his military service. The sender identified himself as Staff Sergeant Kevin Walsh, currently deployed with the 82nd Airborne Division. But what caught Marcus's attention wasn't the military connection. It was the location signature, Fort Liberty, North Carolina. "Captain Rodriguez, we need to meet. What's happening in Chicago is part of something much bigger. They're using your model in places where it was never meant to be used." The meeting took place 2 days later in a small diner outside Milwaukee, chosen specifically because it was outside the surveillance perimeter that Marcus now assumed surrounded his Chicago operations. Walsh arrived in civilian clothes, but his bearing immediately identified him as active military. "Sir, I'm part of a unit that's been deployed to 3 different cities over the past 6 months, Walsh explained, keeping his voice low. "Memphis, Detroit, and now Minneapolis. We're implementing something called Community Integration Protocol. It's your Chicago program, but weaponized." What Walsh described was a nightmare version of everything Marcus had built. Military units were being embedded in urban communities under the guise of assistance programs, but their real mission was intelligence gathering and population control. Former gang members were being recruited not for legitimate rehabilitation, but as informants reporting on community activities to military handlers. "The kids don't know they're being used," Walsh continued. "They think they're getting real opportunities, but every job placement comes with monitoring requirements. Every business relationship is documented. Every family connection is mapped." Marcus felt sick as he realized the scope of the corruption. His success in Chicago had been perverted into a template for domestic military occupation, deployed in cities across the United States under the pretense of community assistance. Walsh's unit had been ordered to establish a similar program in Minneapolis, but several soldiers had grown uncomfortable with the mission parameters. They were reaching out to Marcus because they believed he could help them expose what was happening. "We enlisted to defend America, sir, not to spy on American families who are just trying to make their lives better." The conversation revealed that Colonel Blackstone was part of a larger network of military officials who had been planning domestic deployment strategies for years. The Chicago program provided them with the perfect cover, a seemingly successful community intervention model that could be scaled nationally while concealing its true surveillance functions. Back in Chicago, the pressure on Marcus's organization continued to escalate. Federal agents had begun conducting routine inspections of businesses associated with Sentinel solutions, creating an atmosphere of intimidation that threatened to undo years of trust building. Tank Williams approached Marcus with devastating news. The auto repair shop where he worked had been subjected to 3 federal inspections in 1 week, each time with agents suggesting that the shop was being used for money laundering operations. "The owner is talking about letting me go," Tank said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "He can't afford to keep dealing with federal harassment just because he gave an ex-gang member a chance." Similar reports came from across Marcus's network. Maria Williams had received notification that her college scholarship was being re-evaluated due to concerns about her family's background. Viper Thompson's legitimate security contracting license was being reviewed by state regulators following anonymous complaints. The systematic destruction of individual lives wasn't random harassment. It was a carefully orchestrated campaign designed to demonstrate that Marcus's approach to community transformation was unsustainable. El Fantasma and Colonel Blackstone were collaborating to prove that reformed criminals couldn't maintain legitimate lives, justifying the need for permanent surveillance and control. Detective Foster's position became increasingly precarious when she received a transfer order to a desk job in the suburbs. Lieutenant Hayes delivered the news with barely concealed satisfaction. "The department feels that your close association with certain community organizations has compromised your objectivity," Hayes explained. "This transfer will help you regain proper perspective on law enforcement priorities." Foster understood immediately that her support for Marcus's organization had made her a target. But rather than accepting the transfer, she made a decision that would define her career. She requested a meeting with the FBI's Chicago field office to report suspected corruption in the federal handling of organized crime cases. The meeting took place in a sterile conference room in the federal building downtown. Foster presented her evidence methodically, documenting the connections between Ellie, Phantasma's criminal organization, and the federal officials who seemed determined to protect his operations while destroying legitimate community programs. Special Agent Rebecca Martinez listened carefully to Foster's presentation, taking detailed notes. But what Foster didn't realize was that Agent Martinez had been investigating similar patterns in other cities where military community intervention programs had been deployed. "Detective Foster," Martinez said after reviewing the evidence, "you've just provided the missing pieces for a multi-state investigation we've been conducting. The corruption you've identified in Chicago is part of a national network. The FBI investigation revealed that Colonel Blackstone's domestic military deployment program was being funded through diverted Defense Department resources, with cooperation from criminal organizations who benefited from the chaos that justified military intervention. Marcus found himself in the unprecedented position of being recruited by the FBI to continue his legitimate community work while serving as an undercover asset in exposing the corruption. The irony wasn't lost on him. Federal agents were asking him to spy on other federal agents. The operation required Marcus to maintain the appearance of cooperation with Colonel Blackstone while secretly documenting the military official's illegal activities. It was the most complex undercover assignment of his career, requiring him to protect his community while gathering evidence against powerful adversaries. Staff Sergeant Walsh provided crucial intelligence from within the military system. His unit in Minneapolis had been ordered to accelerate their community infiltration program, suggesting that Blackstone's network was preparing for a major expansion of domestic military operations. "They're planning something big," Walsh reported during a secure communication. "There's talk about declaring certain urban areas federal stability zones, where normal constitutional protections would be suspended." The revelation added urgency to Marcus's mission. He wasn't just protecting his Chicago community. He was working to prevent the militarization of American cities under the guise of crime prevention. Marcus's strategy required rebuilding trust within his community while simultaneously gathering evidence against the federal conspiracy. He began by addressing his supporters directly, explaining that government agents were trying to destroy their progress by creating false narratives about criminal activity. "They want us to believe that transformation isn't possible," Marcus told a packed community center meeting. "They want to prove that people can't change, that communities can't heal, that the only solution to violence is more violence." The response from community members was immediate and powerful. Instead of being intimidated by federal harassment, families began organizing to document the agents' activities. Parents started recording interactions with officials. Business owners began sharing information about suspicious inspections. Maria Williams, despite the threats to her scholarship, had emerged as a community leader in her own right. She established a social media network that allowed neighborhood residents to share real-time information about federal agent activities, creating a grassroots intelligence system that rivaled anything the government was deploying. "If they want to watch us," Maria announced during the community meeting, "then we'll watch them right back." The young woman's transformation from scholarship recipient to community organizer represented everything Marcus had hoped to achieve. Through his work, not just individual redemption, but the development of civic leadership that could sustain positive change long after he was gone. As federal pressure continued to escalate, Marcus realized that the ultimate test of his mission wouldn't be defeating criminals or corrupt officials. It would be empowering the community to defend itself against those who would exploit their progress for political and financial gain. The former Green Beret Captain had discovered that his most important battle wasn't against enemies abroad, but against those who would betray the principles he had sworn to defend. The culmination came during what was supposed to be a routine community celebration. Marcus had organized a neighborhood festival to celebrate the first anniversary of Sentinel Solutions, bringing together families, reformed gang members, local businesses, and community leaders in Humboldt Park. What none of them expected was that Colonel Blackstone would use the gathering as the centerpiece of his demonstration to Pentagon officials. Hidden cameras had been positioned throughout the park, and military observers were stationed in unmarked vehicles around the perimeter. FBI Special Agent Martinez had warned Marcus about the setup 3 days earlier. Blackstone's bringing a delegation from Washington to witness what he's calling a live demonstration of urban population management. He wants to show them how effectively your program can be used for surveillance and control. The festival itself was everything Marcus had hoped for when he first started his work. Tank Williams had brought his restored 1967 Camaro, the first car he had rebuilt entirely on his own. Maria Williams was preparing to leave for Northwestern University on a full scholarship. Her path cleared after the FBI investigation exposed the harassment campaign against her family. Viper Thompson and Razor Jackson worked together coordinating security for the event. Their former rivalry transformed into professional cooperation. Sarah Chen's expanded electronics business had sponsored educational booths where young people demonstrated coding and robotic skills they had learned through Marcus's programs. But Marcus knew that Blackstone's observers were documenting every interaction, every connection, every relationship, not to celebrate the community's transformation, but to demonstrate how effectively it could be monitored and controlled. The confrontation began when Blackstone arrived at the festival with his Pentagon delegation, expecting to find a compliant community ready to serve as an example of successful military-civilian cooperation. Instead, he encountered something he hadn't anticipated: organized resistance. Maria Williams had coordinated with community members to create a silent but powerful demonstration. As Blackstone's group moved through the festival, families held up signs reading, "Our community, our choice, and surveillance is not safety." The moment that changed everything came when Blackstone approached Marcus directly, speaking loudly enough for his Pentagon observers to hear. "Captain Rodriguez, I trust you're ready to brief these officials on the scalability of your population management techniques." Marcus's response was broadcast live through Maria's social media network, reaching not just the local community, but audiences across the country. "Colonel Blackstone, the only thing I'm ready to brief anyone about is how American communities can heal themselves when given genuine support instead of surveillance." What followed was a public confrontation that exposed the entire conspiracy. Marcus, backed by his community, began detailing Blackstone's collaboration with criminal organizations, the weaponization of community programs, and the plan to implement military control in cities across America. Detective Foster, now working openly with the FBI investigation, arrived with warrants for Blackstone's arrest. But the colonel had one final card to play. He had positioned snipers in buildings surrounding the park, ostensibly for security, but actually to create the kind of violent incident that would justify immediate military intervention. The situation could have ended in tragedy, but Marcus's training and his community's trust in him created an alternative outcome. Using techniques from his military experience in de-escalation, he began coordinating an evacuation that would protect civilians while exposing Blackstone's willingness to endanger innocent people. Staff Sergeant Walsh, who had arrived from Minneapolis with evidence of military crimes in multiple states, took the unprecedented step of publicly refusing Blackstone's orders and directing other soldiers to stand down. "Sir, these are American citizens at a community celebration. I will not participate in operations against our own people." The rebellion within military ranks, combined with FBI arrests and community resistance, collapsed Blackstone's conspiracy within hours. But the victory came at a cost. El Fantasma's organization had used the chaos to eliminate several witnesses and destroy evidence of their collaboration with corrupt federal officials. In the aftermath, Marcus faced a choice that would define the rest of his life. The FBI offered him a position as a federal consultant, traveling to cities across America to help communities develop legitimate programs while exposing similar corruption. It would mean leaving Chicago, but potentially helping thousands of families in other cities. The community's response was immediate and unanimous. Tank Williams spoke for many when he said, "Captain, you taught us that the most important mission is empowering people to protect themselves. We're ready to carry on that mission here while you help other communities." Maria Williams, preparing for her freshman year at Northwestern, had already begun developing plans to study criminal justice and community development. "Someday I want to come back and continue this work," she told Marcus. "But I also want to help other young people in other cities have the same opportunities I've had." 3 months later, Marcus stood in a community center in Denver, Colorado, meeting with local gang leaders who had heard about the Chicago transformation. But this time, he wasn't alone. Tank Williams had joined him as a certified conflict resolution specialist, and Detective Foster had taken a position with a federal task force dedicated to preventing the militarization of community policing. The program they were implementing in Denver incorporated lessons learned from Chicago, but with built-in protections against the kind of exploitation Blackstone had attempted. Community oversight committees, transparent funding, and strict prohibitions on surveillance activities were integral to the new model. Back in Chicago, the South Side had become a destination for community leaders from across the country who wanted to study effective transformation methods. Viper Thompson and Razor Jackson had established a non-profit organization training former gang members to become community mediators in other cities. Jen's business had expanded into a technology incubator, providing startup opportunities for young people who might otherwise have been recruited into criminal organizations. The community center had become a model for youth development programs nationwide. 6 months after the festival confrontation, Marcus received a letter that brought his journey full circle. It was from a homeless veteran in Los Angeles, living on the streets and struggling with PTSD. The veteran had heard about Marcus's story and was asking for guidance on how to find his own path to recovery and purpose. Marcus's response was simple. "Your journey begins with the first person you decide to help. It doesn't matter how small the gesture is. What matters is that you choose to lift someone else up, instead of letting the world drag you both down." The former Green Beret Captain had learned that the most successful missions weren't about defeating enemies, but about creating conditions where people could defeat the circumstances that made them vulnerable to exploitation in the first place. His cardboard sign had been replaced by something far more powerful, a network of transformed lives, each one serving as proof that redemption was possible, that communities could heal, and that the greatest victories were won not through force, but through the patient work of helping people discover their own strength. In cities across America, former gang members were becoming community leaders. Veterans were finding new missions in civilian service, and young people were choosing education over exploitation, all because one homeless man on a Chicago street corner had remembered that his real duty wasn't to any flag or government, but to the people who needed someone to believe in their capacity for transformation. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.